There are moments that test a room, not the room's entertainment value or its energy or its ability to stay on schedule, but the room's character. The moment when something wrong gets said in a space that has gathered people together for a good time, and everything pauses, and everyone in that space has to figure out, quickly and without rehearsal, what kind of room they are going to be. Those moments arrive without warning. They do not give you time to prepare a response. They reveal, in the space of a few seconds, what is already built into the people present, what they were before the moment arrived, what they actually believe underneath the pleasantries, what they will do when the thing that was supposed to stay unsaid gets said out loud in front of everyone. This is a story about one of those moments. About a family who had come to a game show stage carrying the history of 2 countries and the love of 3 generations, and who heard something from across that stage that reduced all of that to 4 words. About what happened in the 30 seconds that followed. And about a host who has spent a career making rooms feel safe, and who, when a room became unsafe, did not hesitate for a single second about what he was going to do next. If you believe that every person who walks through a door brings something the room needs, regardless of where they come from, what they believe, or what they wear on their head, then this story is for you. Hit that like button and subscribe right now before we go any further, because stories about dignity and the people who stand up for it are exactly what this channel is built on, and we come back with one every single week. Now let us meet the Khalil family and talk about what happened on that stage, and why it matters long after the cameras stop rolling. The Khalil family from Dearborn, Michigan, arrived at the Family Feud studio in the fall of 2024 carrying, as all families do, more than their game show preparation. They carried the specific history of a family that had built itself across 2 continents and 2 cultures, and several decades of work and sacrifice and adaptation, and the particular kind of love that forms when people understand, not abstractly but in their daily lives, that home is something you build rather than something you find already assembled. The team captain was 46-year-old Dr. Amira Khalil, a physician who had grown up in Dearborn, the city with the largest Arab-American population in the United States, and who had become, over the past 15 years, one of the most respected family medicine doctors in her community. She was the daughter of immigrants. Her parents had come from Jordan in the late 1970s, with the specific combination of professional credentials and personal courage that immigration at its best tends to require. And they had built a life in Michigan that had made a physician and an engineer out of their 2 children, and had given them grandchildren who spoke Arabic at home and English at school, and moved between the 2 without strain. The way children do, when both languages are loved equally rather than one being treated as a burden, the other is supposed to replace. Her husband Tariq, 49, was a civil engineer who had spent 22 years working on infrastructure projects in the Detroit metropolitan area. Bridges, water systems, the kind of foundational work that most people drive across or turn on without thinking about, and that requires an extraordinary combination of precision and long-term thinking to do well. He was the kind of quiet, thorough professional that his colleagues described as the person they wanted checking the calculations when the margin for error was 0, which in his field was always. Their eldest daughter, Layla, 22, was a senior in college studying public health, with her mother's precision and her father's methodical attention to how systems work and why they fail and what it would take to make them work better. Their son, Karim, 19, was in his first year at the University of Michigan, studying computer science, with the particular focused intelligence of someone who has always been drawn to the logic underneath things. The pattern, the rule, the reason, the answer is what it is. And the 5th member of the team was Amira's mother, 72-year-old Fatima, who had come from Jordan in 1978, and who had spent the decades since building a life with her husband that she described, when asked, simply as good, and meant it with no irony and no qualification, the way people mean things when they have arrived at a truth after enough time to know it is true. Fatima wore hijab. She had worn it her entire adult life. It was not a statement for her, and it was not a costume, and it was not a political act, and it was not an invitation to commentary. It was simply part of who she was, as unremarkable to her and to her family as the color of her eyes, and she moved through the world in it with the easy, unself-conscious grace of someone who has never considered removing it and does not require the world's approval for wearing it. She spoke English with an accent that carried the warmth and the rhythms of Arabic underneath it, and she had, from the moment she walked onto the Family Feud set, charmed every crew member she encountered with the specific effortless warmth of a woman who likes people and shows it without any calculation. They had applied to Family Feud because Karim had suggested it during a family dinner, and because Fatima had said, immediately and with complete conviction, that she had always wanted to be on television and that this was the sign she had been waiting for. The family had laughed. Nobody had expected Fatima to be serious. Fatima was entirely serious. She had submitted the application herself the following morning, using Karim's laptop and his reluctant guidance on the online form, and had informed the rest of the family of what she had done when the confirmation email arrived. The rest of the family had caught up with her enthusiasm over the next several months as the process moved forward, and by the time they were standing in the studio, they had practiced enough that Fatima had opinions about strategy that she expressed with the confidence of a woman who had been waiting 72 years to demonstrate her instincts about what other people were thinking, and was not going to waste the opportunity. The competing family that day was the Dawson family from a small town in rural Tennessee. 5 of them, 2 brothers, their father, and 2 wives, who had come with the competitive spirit and easy confidence of a family that had been the loudest, funniest, most entertaining people in every room they had ever been in, which had been most of their rooms, which had given them a perhaps slightly overstated sense of how universal their particular brand of entertaining was. The team captain was 51-year-old Gary Dawson, who managed a farm supply business and who had the broad, unhurried manner of someone who has never been in a hurry because his world had never required it. He was not mean-spirited. He was not, in the ordinary circumstances of his daily life, someone who set out to hurt people. He was someone who had grown up in a world that was so thoroughly one thing, one background, one set of assumptions, one set of references, that he had reached the age of 51 with very little occasion to examine what he actually thought about the world outside that one thing. He had opinions. Some of them had been sitting unexamined for a long time. Some of them were the opinions of a man who had absorbed a great deal of a particular kind of noise over the past several years and had not developed the habit of questioning its accuracy. The pregame went normally. Steve Harvey worked through both families with the warm professionalism that he had turned into an art form over years of doing this. He spent time with the Khalil family and was clearly delighted by Fatima, who answered his questions about herself with a combination of warmth and dry humor that made the production crew laugh before the audience had even processed what she had said. He asked her what she was hoping to win with the prize money if they won. She said she was going to buy a new dishwasher because hers had been broken for 2 years, and her husband kept saying he was going to fix it. Tarek beside her raised one hand in a gesture of acknowledged guilt. The audience laughed. Steve Harvey laughed. Fatima looked satisfied. The first round was well played by both families. The Khalils were fast and coordinated. Months of practice around Fatima's kitchen table had produced a family unit with strong communication instincts and the particular competitive drive of people who have prepared thoroughly and intend to show it. The Dawsons were confident and quick. Gary was good at the buzzer. The audience was engaged. It was, by every measure, a good afternoon of television. The comment came in the pause between the first and second rounds. Gary Dawson, standing at his podium, looked across the stage at the Khalil family. His eyes rested for a moment on Fatima. He said something to his brother, at the conversational volume of a man who had never had particular reason to filter himself in the presence of people unlike him, because he had rarely been in the presence of people unlike him. He said that with everything going on in the world, he was not sure how he felt about this. He gestured, with a small motion of his head, toward the Khalil side of the stage. And then he said the 4 words that the ambient microphones caught clearly, that the front rows of the audience heard, that reached the Khalil podium in the specific way that certain things travel across a room faster than they should. Go back to your country. He said it quietly. He said it to his brother. He did not shout it or announce it. He said it the way people say things when they believe they are speaking a shared private truth to someone who will understand it without the thing needing to be elevated into an actual statement. It was not elevated into a statement by him. It was elevated into a statement by what happened next. Layla heard it. She was 22 years old, and she had been hearing variations of this particular sentence in different registers and different contexts for as long as she could remember. She had been born in Dearborn, Michigan. Her country was the country she was standing in. She had heard the sentence anyway in hallways online in the form of looks that said it without words, in the form of words that said it without apology. She was not surprised. She was tired, the way people are tired of things that happen too often and that they never chose and that keep happening regardless. She looked at her mother. Karim had heard it. He was 19 years old, first year at the University of Michigan, and he had a very clear and detailed understanding of the history of those 4 words in this country, what they had been said to, across what decades, from what direction. He looked at his father. Tarek looked at his wife. Amira's face had done something controlled, the controlled thing that a physician's face does when information arrives that requires a response, but the response must be managed because the context requires it. She looked at Tarek, then she looked at Steve Harvey. Fatima did not look at anyone. She straightened in her seat. She put her hands on the podium in front of her. She lifted her chin exactly 1 degree. That was all. That was the entire external expression of what those 4 words had arrived to do and what she had decided in the 2 seconds between hearing them and sitting up straighter they were not going to be allowed to do. She had been in this country for 46 years. She had raised a physician. She had raised a civil engineer. She had raised grandchildren who were going to make things the country needed. She was sitting in a television studio in the United States of America where she had every right to be, wearing what she had always worn, being exactly who she had always been, and 4 words from across a stage were going to accomplish exactly nothing with her. She lifted her chin 1 degree and she looked straight ahead at Steve Harvey and she waited. Steve Harvey had heard it. He had been in the middle of something when the words crossed the stage, in the middle of a transition, a setup, a movement between segments, and then he was not in the middle of it anymore. He was still. The specific stillness of a person who has received a piece of information that has cleared everything else from the immediate foreground. He looked at Gary Dawson. He looked at the Khalil family. He looked at Fatima, whose chin was lifted and whose hands were on the podium, and whose face was doing the thing that his face must have also been doing. The thing where you decide, in the seconds between the thing happening and your response to it, exactly who you are going to be. Then he walked to the center of the stage, not with fury, not with any of the performed outrage that a moment like this could easily have justified, with something more permanent than outrage. With the settled, certain, long-formed conviction of a man who has been told versions of that sentence himself, in different words, at different points in his life, and who knows from the inside exactly what those 4 words are designed to do, and exactly what it costs a person to absorb them with dignity, and exactly what it means that the woman across from him had absorbed them, and was still sitting there with her chin up, waiting. "Stop," Steve said. His voice was the voice he always used, which was also not, right now, the voice he always used. It was that voice with something underneath it that made it carry differently. He looked at the production team. He looked at the audience. He looked at Gary Dawson. "Something was just said," Steve said, "that I heard clearly and that I am going to address right now because I am not going to continue this taping and pretend that I didn't hear it." The studio was completely, absolutely still. 4 words were just said across this stage, Steve continued, that have a history in this country that everyone in this room knows. Go back to your country. He said them. He named them directly without circumventing them because the power of that phrase depends in part on the willingness of the room to treat it as unspeakable, and he was not going to give it that. "I want to talk about those 4 words because I think they deserve a direct response." He turned to the Khalil family. He looked at each of them before he spoke, at Layla, at Karim, at Tarek, at Amira. His eyes rested on Fatima last. "This woman," he said, "came to this country in 1978. She raised 2 children here. She has grandchildren here. Her daughter is a doctor who has spent 15 years taking care of families in her community. Her son-in-law has spent 22 years building the infrastructure of the city I'm pretty sure all of us benefit from. Her granddaughter is in college studying public health. Her grandson is at the University of Michigan." He paused. "This is their country. It has been their country for 46 years, and I want to make absolutely certain that was said clearly in this room in front of everyone watching so there is no ambiguity about it." He turned to face Gary. "I want to ask you something," Steve said, "and I am asking it as a genuine question, not as a trick. What country did you just tell this family to go back to? Because they are from here. They were made here. Their children were born here. So I genuinely want to understand what you meant, because if you meant what it sounded like you meant, if you looked at that woman in her headscarf and decided that the scarf told you something about where she belongs, then I want you to understand that you looked at a piece of cloth and reached a conclusion about a person that the person herself, and 60 years of American history, and the basic requirement of treating another human being as fully human, does not support." Gary Dawson had the expression of a man who had said something out loud that he had said in his head many times, and was now, for the first time, in the experience of having it reflected back to him in direct, unhedged language in front of 200 people, and a national television audience. He did not look comfortable. He also did not look like a man who was prepared to double down. He looked like a man who was in the early stages of sitting with something that was going to take a while to fully sit with, and who was beginning to understand, in real time and against his expectations, that the room was not with him. "I didn't mean anything by it," Gary said. Steve Harvey looked at him with the patient, direct gaze of someone who has heard that sentence before and knows exactly what it does and does not cover. "I believe you believe that," he said, "but I want you to think about why it came out. Think about what you looked at that made those 4 words be the words that came. Because if you didn't mean anything by them, then something in you reached for them for no reason. And I don't think that's true. I think something in you looked at this family and decided they were less from here than you are. And I'm asking you to sit with where that came from, because it came from somewhere." He turned back to the Khalil family. And then he did something that nobody in the studio was expecting, and that became, in the days and weeks following the broadcast, the moment that every discussion of the episode returned to. He looked at Fatima, and he said, quietly and directly, as if no one else in the room was present, "I want to apologize to you on behalf of this experience. You came here today to play a game and have a good time with your family. What just happened was not something you should have had to deal with on a Tuesday afternoon in a television studio. You handled it with more grace than it deserved. I want you to know that I see that." Fatima looked at Steve Harvey for a moment. The chin was still lifted. The hands were still on the podium. And then, with the particular economy of expression of a woman who does not waste words, she said, "Thank you. Now let us play. I want that dishwasher." The studio broke. Not with the polite, cute applause of a game show audience. With the real, sudden, full-body laughter and warmth of 200 people who had been sitting in an uncomfortable place, and had just been released from it by a 72-year-old woman from Jordan who had decided that 4 ignorant words and a gracious apology were not going to define her afternoon, and that the dishwasher she had been waiting 2 years for was going to be purchased this Tuesday if she had anything to say about it. Steve Harvey laughed. He laughed the way he laughs when something genuinely surprises him, with his whole face, with the specific delight of someone who did not see that response coming and is completely charmed by it. He looked at the audience. He looked at Tariq, who was smiling the smile of a man who has been married to Fatima for 50 years and is never entirely surprised by her but is always entirely delighted. He shook his head slowly. "That is that woman right there," he said. "That is absolutely that woman." The Khalil family played the rest of the game with Fatima as the undisputed anchor of the enterprise. She was, it turned out, exactly as good at Family Feud as she had always believed she would be, which is to say, excellent. She had the instincts of someone who had spent 46 years observing human beings across 2 cultures with the attentive curiosity of a person who was interested in people rather than performed for them. She knew what people wanted. She knew what they feared. She knew what they reached for when they were nervous, and what they reached for when they were happy, and what 100 randomly selected Americans would say when asked to name something you find in a kitchen, or something that annoys you about your neighbor, or something you do before a big day. She gave answers that hit with a frequency that made Karim, who had built the spreadsheet, look at his grandmother with the specific expression of someone discovering that the person they underestimated in the nicest possible way had been right all along. Amira was fast and precise, the physician's instinct for pattern recognition showing in how she processed the questions and the board simultaneously. Tariq was steady and quiet, and gave answers at exactly the right moment with the precision of someone who double-checks the calculation before he speaks. Layla was quick and creative, her public health training giving her an unusually broad model of what human beings in aggregate tended to do and want and worry about. And Karim, the computer science student who had started all of this with one dinner table suggestion, played with the full focus intensity of someone who has decided this is important and has brought all of his resources to bear on making it go well. The Khalil family won the main game. They went a fast money with Amira going first and Fatima going second. Amira scored 128 points with the clean efficiency of a professional who has been making quick, accurate decisions under pressure for 15 years. And then Fatima walked to the fast money podium, slowly, with the unhurried pace of a woman who is not in a hurry because she knows where she is going, and stood at the microphone and looked at Steve Harvey with the expression of someone who has been waiting for this exact moment since Karim submitted the application and is completely ready for it. Steve read the first question. Fatima answered it before he had fully finished the sentence. She answered the second one the same way, the third, the fourth. Her fifth answer was the #1 response on the board by a margin that suggested the survey had been written specifically for her. Her total was 156 points. The Khalil family's combined score was 284 points. They had won $20,000, and the kind of moment that does not fit entirely inside a dollar amount. When Steve Harvey brought the check to Amira, he held it between them for a moment and said something to her that was not fully audible in the broadcast, but that Amira later described in an interview. He said that her mother was one of the finest people he had met on that stage in all his years of hosting. Amira looked at him and said that she knew. He said that he believed her. Then he turned to Fatima and handed her the check directly, which is not standard procedure but which felt, in the context of everything that had happened that afternoon, like the only right choice. Fatima took the check, held it with both hands, looked at it for a moment, looked at her grandchildren, and said one word in Arabic that translates approximately as, "Finally." The audience, which had been through a journey that afternoon that no audience signs up for explicitly, but that leaves them changed in ways they carry home, responded with the warmth of people who have witnessed something real and are expressing, in the only collective way available to them, that they are glad they were there. The episode aired 5 weeks later. The clip of Steve's response to Gary, the naming of the phrase, the refusal to treat it as unspeakable, the specific accounting of what the Khalil family had built in this country, and what that meant about the question of where they belonged, was shared extensively through Muslim American communities, Arab American advocacy organizations, and the broader networks of people who had been told those 4 words or known someone who had. The precision of what Steve had said was noted repeatedly. Specifically, the move of naming the phrase directly rather than euphemizing it, and the specific challenge to Gary to examine not the intention but the source. Something in you reached for those words for a reason, and that reason came from somewhere. That framing, less about condemning the moment and more about requiring the person to actually examine it, was commented on by educators, therapists, and people who worked in diversity and inclusion contexts as unusually sophisticated for an unrehearsed response in a live setting. Fatima's response, the dishwasher, became one of the most widely shared clips the show produced that season. It was shared as a demonstration of something that has been written about extensively, but is rarely shown this cleanly in real time: the refusal to let hostility on the moment. The refusal to give those 4 words the gravity they were designed to produce. The choice, made instantaneously and without any visible effort, to name what mattered, the dishwasher, the family, the game, and to relocate the afternoon there rather than in the place the 4 words had tried to put it. Theologians wrote about it. Psychologists wrote about it. A poet in Detroit wrote a short piece about Fatima that circulated through Arab American networks, and that said, in its final lines, that the most radical act available to a person who has been told they do not belong is to adjust their chin 1 degree and decide they were never asking. Gary Dawson did not make any public statement after the episode aired. His daughter-in-law, who had been standing beside him at the podium that afternoon with the expression of someone absorbing something about the person she had married that she was going to be sitting with for a long time, posted a brief, private message of apology to a Dearborn-based Arab American community organization's social media account in the weeks following the broadcast. It did not receive a public response. The organization acknowledged it quietly. What Gary himself did with the experience is not something anyone outside his family and his own conscience can speak to. What he was asked to confront was the specific, uncomfortable work of examining where 4 words came from in a person who says they did not mean anything by them. Whether he did that work is between him and whoever he is when nobody is watching. Fatima got her dishwasher. Tarek bought it and installed it the week after the episode aired, before it occurred to either of them to mention that the prize money had not yet arrived. He bought it because after 22 years of building things that were supposed to last, he understood that some decisions were not really about logistics. Fatima used it for the first time on a Sunday, washing the dishes from a family dinner where all of them had been gathered, Amira and Tarek and Layla and Karim, and her husband who had come from Jordan with her in 1978, and her son who lived 40 minutes away and had driven over specifically for the meal. She stood in her kitchen watching the dishwasher run its first cycle and felt, she said later, the specific satisfaction of someone for whom a small convenience that most people take for granted represents something larger and more personal. The evidence of a life built, piece by piece, in a country that has not always made the building easy, but that has been, in its best moments, worth building in. She watched the episode when it aired on a Thursday evening sitting in that kitchen with Karim, who had started all of this with one dinner table comment, and who watched his grandmother watch herself on television with the look of someone encountering, perhaps for the first time, the full weight of who she was. When the part came where she lifted her chin and said, "Now let us play," and Steve Harvey laughed and the room went up, Fatima watched herself and nodded once with the expression of someone who is checking something against a private standard and finding that it holds. "Good," she said. Karim looked at her. "That's all you have to say? Good." Fatima looked at her grandson. "What else is there to say?" she said. "We played, we won, I got the dishwasher. That is the whole story." It is not the whole story, of course. The whole story includes 46 years in a country that took her family and gave her grandchildren. It includes a physician daughter and an engineer husband and a community in Dearborn that has been building something in America since before most people were paying attention. It includes all the versions of those 4 words that had arrived over those 46 years in different forms and different registers, and that had been absorbed with the same lifted chin, and the same steady hands, and the same refusal to let the words be larger than the life they were aimed at. The whole story is long and complex, and has not finished yet. But Fatima is not wrong that this part of it, the game show part, the Tuesday afternoon in the studio part, resolved cleanly and in the right direction and with a dishwasher at the end of it, and that those facts together make a certain kind of sense that she is content to let stand. Her country, her family, her chin, her dishwasher. Go back to your country, 4 words said across a stage by someone who looked at a piece of cloth and thought he knew the whole story. He was wrong. He had looked at one small thing and missed the whole enormous rest of it. That happens. It happens less, hopefully, when someone with a microphone and a platform and 30 years of knowing what rooms need looks at the person who said the wrong thing and says, "You are looking at the wrong thing. Look again. Look at what is actually there." What is actually there is a 72-year-old woman from Jordan who came here in 1978 and built a life that the country should be proud of having. That is what is actually there. It was always there. It just needed, for one Tuesday afternoon, for the room to stop and turn and really look. If this story moved you, if it made you think about someone in your own life who has absorbed more versions of those 4 words than they should ever have had to, or if it reminded you that the question of where someone belongs is never answered by where they came from, share this today. Send it to someone who needs it. Leave a comment and tell us what part of Fatima's story stayed with you, because this community reads those comments, and they are part of why this space is worth coming back to. And if you are not already here with us, subscribe right now, because every single week we come back with stories exactly like this one. Stories about the people this world tries to make smaller and who refuse, every time, to cooperate. Stories about what it looks like when a room is asked what kind of room it is going to be and chooses correctly. And stories about the moments, like this one, where a 72-year-old woman adjusts her chin 1 degree and reminds everyone watching that she was never asking for permission to be exactly who she has always been. We will see you in the next one.